How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest. He's a man who's had four previous appearances on Strength Chat, and if I'm being completely honest, since doing the intern with him, he's been a huge influence on me in terms of how I coach. When we did the intern a lot of years ago, so I'm really happy to say today we are joined by the one and only Jason Tremblay. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to be on your podcast, but it was also a pleasure to have you as an intern with TSG. So thank you.
Thank you very much. But yeah, obviously, myself in the background, always looking at the content, the information yourself and the strength guys put out there. But I suppose the first question is, how are you? What's been kind of happening in your world recently? What's been going on?
Yeah, so I'm good and been fortunate enough to get married and getting settled in Canada after some more travels last year. So um, on the work front, been a busy period getting competitors ready for the upcoming competitive season. After August, things kind of settle down for a bit, and then we have a rush in October. But most of the national championships and such are February and March. And the way I write training, I find myself doing a heavy dose of long-term planning for events like that. So um, I don't really have an easy period in my work. It's always detailed, it's always involved, and I'm always trying to get the best out of people. So um, yeah, things are good here.
Nice, cool. And I suppose kind of, diving into the topics when we spoke before, because this is something that I've heard you speak about, a lot of other coaches is speaking about, and I think this came off the back of I think it was the World Games, or around the World Games, about volume. And I know from conversations we've had in the past, I suppose the first question is the chat about volume something new? Is it because sometimes I think everything kind of like circles around a little bit and the spotlight gets put on things. Is this something new that's been, done in training, or is this something that, you've been implementing, for a while for maybe people who are kind of relatively new to powerlifting, or coaches new to powerlifting?
Yeah, so to give a little backstory on that, I started coaching when I was 19. So I've been coaching for over 14 years now. And I started coaching in natural bodybuilding. And I think if it were not for prescribing 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per day, 2 to 3 times per week, I don't think I would have been able to distinguish myself and get my career off the ground as a successful natural bodybuilding coach back when I started, when the number of online coaches was probably like less than 20 in
Yeah.
reality, and now it's hundreds. Um, so I saw early on the effects of increasing volume on muscle growth. And I got into powerlifting coaching in 2013. Um, I saw pretty early on there as well that like programs like the Russian squat program, Shaiko, Smolov, seem to be resulting in some pretty robust gains that other programs don't produce. And for the first 4 years of coaching, not for a lack of trying, but just my lack of experience and lack of guidance, I didn't really have consistent results with clients, and I didn't have a system of beliefs and training. And so some people did really well who were predisposed to doing very well, and other people didn't do so well. And so in 2017, this all sort of came to a head. I was doing internships in strength and conditioning to see what it was like to work with professional sports. And I had opportunities, whether it was starting a gym or potentially, um, I interviewed with a few NBA teams and another professional leagues. So I had opportunities in sports science, and I had to decide, was I going to choose powerlifting or go into professional sports? And I chose powerlifting. Um, but a big reason I chose powerlifting is because the coach who I thought was doing the most effective work at that time had agreed to mentor me and help me. So in the 2010s, I think the most successful coaches from my point of view were Mike Teixeira, Ben Esgro, Mike Sordos, Matt Gary. These were the ones that were like really on my radar, and I'm sure there's others, but that was who I saw. And whenever I saw Ben Esgro's athletes compete, whether it was Lane Norton or Ellis McLean or Eli Burks or Ryan Doris, I'm like, man, like these guys are incredible. Like 9 for 9, robust strength gains. They're regularly on the podium, and they just look different on the platform. Like they look more prepared than others, if you can kind of see that difference. And so I asked Ben, who was getting ready to retire from coaching and just go full on with his supplement business at the time, which is called De Novo Nutrition, if he would help me out with Taylor Atwood and others. And so we started coaching a team of athletes together. And Ben brought with him a daily undulating periodization training system that he built down in Florida with Mike Sordos and in collaboration, kind of like as a trickle-down effect from Matt Gary and all these names that we now know as experts in the community. And Ben's system was just amazing. Like I don't believe that any coach is ever a wizard. I think if someone's called a wizard, that's like a sham. Um, but people don't like this. But I've just seen it so many times where you increase the stimulus and someone gets stronger. And so, more often than not, if you work more and you work harder, the results are positive.
Mm.
And there's a wide range of different responses that you get to the training intervention. Like people respond differently. Some people may come to you and they're already doing maybe more than they need to be doing. But on average, I would say that if there was a hack, it would be try increasing your volume at weights that stimulate strength gain, and usually good things happen.
Yeah.
And so Ben brings this systematic, measurable approach to programming the TSG, and Taylor, among others, went on one of, if not the most dominant runs in the history of the sport for the next 4 years. And his gains were just like mind blowing to me. And we're seeing this with other lifters that we were coaching too. And so I built a system around this, and I've spent countless hours since 2017 crafting our sports science materials, mentoring our coaches, working with interns, and building our education system as well. So that was the foundation of our system, and it's really based on that observation that like, man, these like high volume programs seem to produce robust gains. And when we measure this and we increase it, we're seeing similar things happen.
Yeah.
It's not without side effects, because when you increase the dose, you increase the risk of side effects as well. So there's a risk and a reward that I think every situation and its context needs to be weighed. Um, but for us, that's when we started to prescribe volume, and I think operating under this belief system has allowed me to carve out a successful career in coaching, among other things.
Yeah. Yeah, with that, it's cool hearing about how it kind of all came together. And a key thing that you've said there of, you spent hours, building that system, refining that system to great effect in terms of the results that you've had with your lifters. One thing that you said there is, it's important to know that when you do increase the dose, there is going to be a risk there, but it's kind of being aware of that. And I suppose for I was going to say coaches, but probably for lifters, so they're aware as well. Is what what is that line? Because sometimes you can learn from observations, but also you learn from mistakes. And I suppose from yourself, refining this system, but then like with anything, whenever there is success, other people will look at that and think, all right, so I'm gonna give this a go. What's kind of the obstacles or challenges that you found, or the data points or information from the lifter where you think, right, okay, if they start saying this is from a previous cycle, right? I need to be aware of this or change this, or I can push this a little bit more. I realized there was quite a lot in that little bit there, but does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I'll start with like a breakdown of what training dose is. So, in the research, training load is the term. And I find load a little bit confusing because, like, are we talking about the weight that is on the bar, or are we talking about your overall workload? And it's not really clear. So, Ben Esgro is a pharmaceutical chemist, which is not the secret to our gains, by the way. And he works with the dose response relationship. And so we call it training dose instead, because I think dose more completely covers our thoughts. When you look at the research on training load is broken down into the external workload, which is the mechanical work that you perform, and the internal workload, which is the physiological toll it took on your body. And in sports science, there's ways of measuring the physiological toll that it takes on your body. So you think about running or cycling, measuring blood lactate levels, for example. But in powerlifting, this is completely impractical. But what powerlifting has as an advantage over other sports is it's incredibly simple. You train the movements that you compete with, and so the program can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. It could be as simple as SBD. That's what you're doing. And it could be as complicated as, step ups and different angles of push ups off a belt squat machine and all this crazy stuff that you see online. But at its core, it's been written about all throughout training literature that there's different types of loads. So different types of training dosages. The lowest level is a detraining load. Okay, so you could either train too little or too light that you will lose an ability. The next one is a maintenance load, so you can do enough to maintain an ability. And then after that, you have a stimulating load. So we are now improving what we're trying to improve. And then you have an overreaching load. And so this is the dose response relationship right there. Too little is not going to do it. Too much could lead to counterproductive effects. So we kind of want to err just under too much. And so in our practice, we believe in measuring the training because powerlifting is so simple. This is an advantage that you can have. And so what we'll do is we'll write a very simple training program, oftentimes, because I'd say I use more variations and I do write accessories and uh, I probably have more experience than most, if not all, powerlifting coaches and strength and conditioning too. So like I'm not just blindly writing SBD.
Yeah.
But if you write squat bench dead 2 to 3 times per week and you get stronger, then there's a pretty good chance that how you train squat bench dead is what got you stronger. Whereas if I'm doing step ups, belt squat push ups, rope pull throughs, hip thrusts, leg curls, leg extensions, lunges, um, half range squats, accommodating resistance squats, and I get stronger. What was it?
Yeah.
This program worked, and it may have been novel for the person, but you can't measure what made that person stronger because the program's, from a simplicity standpoint, it's chaotic. It's very complex. So when we write simple training programs, which has the advantage of being able to measure exactly how much volume and intensity you did, so that we can measurably do more over time, take the guesswork out of whether we're progressing or not, which is why we do it. The risk of that primarily is repetitive stress. Um, another risk would be that if a person has a relative limiting muscle group in force production in a lift. So let's say that your chest isn't very strong and you suck off the chest on bench press, or your quads aren't very strong and you get stuck out of the hole on squat or on deadlift off the floor. And you are routinely shifting the load demands onto your hips and back. So you're turning your squat into a good morning. You're turning your deadlift into a stiff leg deadlift. Bench, you're just getting stapled if your chest isn't strong enough. Uh, well, if you're routinely overloading your hips and back, then the risk of having some sort of repetitive stress injury in your hips and back is likely higher than if you're not. And the risk is even higher if you have an injury history in your hips and back, because now you're shifting the load demands onto those muscle groups that aren't as strong as they once were because of your injury history. And now you have the cycle of recurring injuries. So this is something that I had to deal with a lot when we were writing very specific training programs. And reducing injury risk is an area where I think we've been able to make massive improvements in recent years as well.
Yeah. I think the key thing that you've said from there is, or a couple of key things that you said was, you mentioned about keeping the program quite simple, whereas loads of variations in there. And as you were speaking there, one of the topics that I wanted to speak about was how do you create something that is repeatably successful. And I think actually from what you've said there, for the from a coach's point of view, is that, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this, that they're trying to think about the one result on the platform, and that one block. So I'll be like, right, we're gonna add this in. Right, well, that must have been it. Whereas actually, another key thing that you said there was it takes out the guesswork later down the line, and it's something where you can add more into. Whereas if there's a lot of things going on, and all of a sudden in the next block or the next cycle it doesn't go quite to plan, it's like, oh, we'll take this out, and then you've got more thinking to do. So do you think, in terms of when we're talking about repeatable systems, things that are gonna drive long term success? You've mentioned Taylor there, in 4 years, dominating the sport. Do you think that's where coaches maybe misunderstand it? They've got the idea of the programming, but are misunderstanding, or missing out on the bigger picture of what success and repeatable success is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I think there's just a lack of understanding of principles of strength and the principles of training and the theory that's come before this wave of popularity in powerlifting. Because like our training is systematic, but like as time goes on, it's just more and more an interpretation of the scientific method and what you would read in Essentials of Strength and Conditioning and take out for powerlifting, or what you would read from Periodization 6th edition and take out for powerlifting. Like it's not like we're doing something revolutionary. We're actually very in line with training theory that's come before us. I think that we've done a really good job of organizing training, though, so that coaches can interpret the information that they're seeing and make actionable, safe, and effective decisions off of that. Um, so, in terms of designing a training system, I think the first thing that you need to have is a firm belief in what what drives progress and what you're coaching. And our belief is that there's certain preconditions or factors that you want to call it um, that either facilitate progress or limit it. Examples would be your sleep, your nutrition, your capacity to continue getting better, your age, the overall load of your life, stress, etc. And I don't know how to judge whether something's sufficient or not. I'm not really the judge of that, but generally people don't hit massive PRs when they're going through a horrible phase of life.
Mm.
So that's like my observation. Are things like relatively normal? And what do I know about your life? Like, how could this be affecting your training? Because I notice that people who work jobs of physical labor or parents of young kids, they tend to peak real well when they're not working or when they're not being woken up by a crying baby the night before the meet. And they could dedicate all of their energy to what's on the platform. It's different if you're just a college student, where lifting is the hardest part of your day. So if these performance limiting and facilitating factors are just like adequate, they're not horrible. Then there's a certain dose, which is volume, intensity, and also to some extent how your body is receiving the training that is required to progress. And if you get stronger, you can continue at the similar training approach that's been working, but lift heavier weights because you're stronger. And you have now satisfied the requirement for progressive overload to stimulate adaptation. But if you didn't get stronger, then you may have to increase the dose in order to start getting stronger. And increasing the dose is not just increasing volume. It could mean that you need to increase intensity, or it could mean that you need to increase both.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that continuously, gradually increasing the dose over the course of an athlete's career produces pretty consistent gains in strength for the most part. If you do it gradually, the injuries tend to be pretty minor and slow, tendon or something like that. It's not like a acute freak injury where like, your muscle's off the bone or something, which you think maybe that's more likely to happen under a 1RM or something that goes wrong. So I think a slow and gradual build approach to an athlete's career is not just sustainable and effective. I think it's a little bit more fail-safe than the alternative of going fast and aggressive or
Mm.
training off of very high intensities. And you can increase the dose until there's been a change in training sensitivity. And changes in training sensitivity would be maybe you lost or gained a bunch of weight. And now it's either way harder, way easier to get stronger, or maybe you've just gotten a lot older and getting stronger is a lot harder. Or it's not on the table anymore if you're like deep into your master's years and you've been training for a long time. Or if you miss time due to injury.
Yeah.
So that's our belief system to training in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And that really drives how we approach this problem. So once we have our belief system, the next thing is trying to figure out what a stimulating amount of training is to improve performance on this lift. And so when you think about it, the training dose is lower than a maintenance dose, which is lower than the stimulating dose, which is lower than an overreaching dose. So if you wanted to develop a system of determining what a stimulating dose is, you would start at a maintenance dose and add training in until it started working. And then you would call that not necessarily the minimum effective dose, but it's the minimum effective dose for a more sustainable way of training. The minimum effective dose may be doing, one or two RP9 singles a week and like 2 to 4 back downs at 70 to 85%. But
Yeah.
nobody, to my knowledge, is training that way over the course of their entire career and achieving great things in powerlifting. So that's a useful piece of knowledge, but it's not a training system. It's
Yeah.
it's very high intensity training that can
Yeah.
get you stronger. Or when we think about what influences progress, and we think about the Russian squat program and Shaco, seen a lot of lifters throughout history train around 75, 80, 85% of the 1RM for a lot of work and get a lot stronger too. And so we start to see this like curved relationship where you could do very low volume at very high intensity and get stronger, or you could do more volume at like 75, 80, 85% intensities and get stronger. So we believe in doing more volume at lower intensities. You have better form, promotes muscle gain, builds work capacity so that when you need to do more training in the future, you can. So that's like our minimum effective dose. It's like 75 to 85%. What can we do to get you better?
Yeah.
So this is the first three steps of our training system. What's the belief? How are we integrating the principles of training into our processes? And then identifying an effective dose. The next step of our training system is identifying some constraints. So, for example, let's say that you don't believe in doing more than 5 reps on deadlift. You don't believe in doing more than 5 sets of a main lift in one workout, and you don't believe in that work sets should be any harder than an RPE of 6, RPE of 7, let's say. Okay, so now you have the boundaries of how hard you could push a day before, if you think more volume is needed, you need to add another day in. How hard you could push a day might be doing 5 by 5 at 80%. That's average RPE of 7. You can't go any higher than that without breaking the boundaries of your system. So if the person needs more volume, then you got to add another day of deadlift,
Yeah.
something like that. So this is how you can go from a hypothesis to training principles to processes and then constraints. And now you have a systematic way of training. So TSG has so many different systematic ideas and concepts to show coaches through our education program, but that's just an example of one of them.
Yeah, definitely. I always and what I really liked from the internship and how kind of like my brain now works is I always think of it like a flow chart, and it's like, right, how do we go from there? And it helps make decisions, because that's something that you've mentioned quite a lot, from the start of this chat to now, is taking out that guesswork, making more informed decisions, because sometimes it's just a case of just saying, "Oh, well, we'll give this, and we'll try this, give this a go." But if you're not sure or not convinced that it's actually going to have a positive outcome, you've spoken there about training principles. It's like, well, this has been shown to work. There's other programs that have been shown to work on this. That's more of an informed answer, rather than just kind of say, "Oh, do you know what? I'm just going to give this a go and see how it works." Because ultimately, everybody, yes, obviously at the elite level, everybody wants to be successful. But if you're going to go into something, whether it be at just like a regional level as well, you want some level of success. And a little bit like what you mentioned, it might not be hitting PBs, it might be going 9 for 9, and building that total. One thing, just going back to what you said a little bit earlier, two kind of keywords that came out was, gradually increasing, which then leads to consistent progress. But then also I mentioned about injuries as well. And one thing that I wanted to touch on is, because you mentioned about variables, outside of the gym. Sometimes there are athletes, lifters that, um, even though they've got everything going on outside, they can still keep pushing. And sometimes it's a case of, because we know, right, we want to gradually increase it. That time frame might differ from lifter to lifter, even though it's a system. You've still got to take that individual into account. And how do you kind of balance that data and information, and then taking into account, like, if the lifter athlete is just flying, but that everything around them isn't going so well? Is that a case of, I can't think of the story's name, where they kind of fly too close to the sun, but it's kind of, if things are going well, sometimes it's like, oh, could we do a little bit more? Could we do a little bit more? How do you kind of balance that? And then I always think, as the coach, you're there to pump the brakes, because sometimes the lifter will just be like, no, 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 I can keep going. How do you kind of balance that within that system, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Um, well, I think it depends on the person's goals because if someone is not in a situation where, their next competition is like in the top two of most important things in their life or something like that, they don't need to win. They're not getting ready for Sheffield or something. Then the approach would be different compared to someone who is trying to win Sheffield, right? Like, if someone's trying to win Sheffield, we will likely be more aggressive with the training intervention to make the most amount of progress that we can in the fastest way possible. And we may have a talk with them about the risks that we think of doing that, and we'll monitor them closely to try to keep them as safe as we can. Because obviously, you're not going to achieve the goal if you're injured either. But you're not going to achieve that goal if you're conservative, too, is my belief. Like you've got to put your foot on the gas pedal. Um, so yeah, like with someone who's training to be a champion or a nationally competitive lifter, it's more aggressive. With someone who's recreational, if they have an approach that's getting them stronger, I think just, keep doing what's working and there's no real reason to put your foot on the gas pedal and just keep raising their volume in that case. If someone is in a super odd or busy period of life, for example, one of our coaches in our group's getting married this weekend. That's a lot of stuff that you have to plan. And I've trained her for years. And so she has less time because she's doing a lot of wedding planning, adjusting to some life changes, and she has more stress. So, how can we get better in the situation where powerlifting is not the main priority? Let's see if we can find a technical breakthrough that improves performance, because I thought there might be one on one of her lifts. And so I set the program up as a technique program. Let's see if we could change this and find more performance. Well, training sessions are not longer than an hour, and they're not stressful. You're not going to get hurt. And sure enough, she did. Another example might be like, let's say that you have a lifter who you think they would benefit from moving quicker under the bar to maximize motor unit recruitment. Well, you could put them in a power phase where they're working on body weight jumps and isometrics and sub 60% 1RM training for 1, 2, 3 weeks and potentially make some gains there that may help you out down the road while still giving them space during their stressful period of life. So I think that's where the art of coaching comes in, is finding other ways to get better. And I think the art of coaching merges with the science of coaching because if you don't know the first principles of strength development, then it's going to be hard to find those ways because you don't really know what to look for.
Yeah, definitely. And we a couple of times we've mentioned about kind of training principles. You know, having an understanding of how to piece all this together. And I I'm a big believer in, especially with myself having worked with Bradford Bulls and Leeds in strength and conditioning, as well as having friends who are sprint coaches and those sorts of things. And the fact that I love talking about strength and conditioning, um, you can pick from from different things, and how can that apply to it? But you know the principles are usually the same. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but do you feel as though when the conversation of volume, training dose, um, gets spoken about, that there's a part of in powerlifting where it's maybe still not as understood because they've not looked at other areas, and because it's not understood, I can't remember the is it off Batman where it's like people are scared of what they don't what they don't understand, and maybe not from a coach's point of view, but actually giving it to lifters, being like, can they actually do this lot of work? Because what I found really interesting in especially being in Thailand and speaking to different coaches, and it's a completely different culture. So fighting is I've actually trained with a powerlifter over here in Thailand, but a lot of it is fighting, like Muay Thai. And I got talking to a Muay Thai coach, and he just said to me that humans are a lot more robust than what you think. Like, we're not brittle, we're not going to break a little bit. And do you think that's kind of, I'm really going down this rabbit hole now, but do you think that's mission are scared of, or what's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when I talk about a stimulating dose, that's to achieve desired adaptations. In the case of powerlifting, this is building strength. There's also a stimulating dose, a dose-response relationship with hypertrophy. Um, and when we're looking at this, we're thinking about what's the amount of squat training or bench training or deadlift training, or adding in accessories if we think that's necessary, which often it is, and supplemental exercises to support structural balance and health. We're thinking about what amount and how heavy do we need to go, how frequently to achieve the goal of this program. And that's going to either set us up for performance gain in the long run if we build muscle training with lighter weights, or we improve performance training with lighter weights. We haven't yet improved our maximum strength, but we're getting better at lifting below 85% of the 1RM. And so through a periodized training process, we can convert those gains in performance with lower loads into maximum strength, right? So that's having the knowledge of programming. I think a lot of people in powerlifting make the mistake of just getting lost at the surface level, volume, intensity, RPE, or even like higher than that, like fatigue singles, golden microcycle, pacing, that like we lose track of the fact that we're training muscles at joint angles, at velocities. We're training our nervous system to produce maximum force. We lose track of the fact that we're like actually pursuing adaptations that improve our performance. We're not just applying these buzzwords that we see in these 30-second Instagram reels to try to improve our performance on squat. Um, so I think that gets lost. And to your second point about people being more robust than they think, sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's also not the case, right? Like sometimes people could be much more robust than they think they are. And other times things can be pretty fragile. So I think this is again supporting the idea of being more gradual with what you're doing so that you could carefully probe and learn as you increase the stimulus or as you make changes to the program in a way where if this fails, you can live with it failing. It's not going to lead to something catastrophic, likely. And if you're more gradual and you kind of take this approach of, I'm going to try this change and see what happens. And these are the patterns that I notice when I did that. And this is what I think I can do in the next training period to help improve things. I think your likelihood of injury goes down significantly. And if you're gradual, I mean, you can make some freaking crazy progress too. Like you think about if you were to add 1,000 kilos of tonnage per phase to your squat for a year, you might be doing like double your current workload. Like you're dead, right? Like you're gonna get stronger doing that. It's very, very likely. And your body will have time to adapt. Whereas if you try to do that by next month, you may get a completely different result that you don't like. So those are my thoughts on it.
Uh, Absolutely, and I can't actually remember where I got this from. I can't remember whether it was from my time at uni or anything like that. But I think, like what you say about going beyond kind of like the surface level, is when you're working with any data, and that's all. That's how in my head information that you're getting from your lifter. Yes, you're getting to know them as a person, building a relationship, which is really important. However, also you want to have a look at the numbers and be like, right, how's that going? And I always think anytime that there's a massive spike, anytime that phrase of whatever goes up must come back down, and it's kind of that thing of if you go too soon, there's a lot more things that are going to go wrong, and part of you mentioned it earlier about injuries are gonna come up, but the scale, I think that may be the right word, the scale or the size of the injury, if it's quite small, you can still train around it. That's okay. Whereas, yeah, as a coach, if I think you've got a duty of care, if you like, to be like, look, this is what it's going to be, and that's why I think patience in especially in when it comes to strength is really undervalued, because I think especially with we spoke about before with online coaches being 20 now, there's 20 times that amount of coaches. It's kind of right, well, I'm going to set myself aside and I'm going to be able to get you these results in half the time, whereas actually that's where things, that risk to reward things, are going to go wrong a little bit more. Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there, but as always, I really really enjoy chatting with you, Jason, and learning from you, really. But the last question that I like to ask is for everyone listening, for the coaches, for the lifters, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom from what we've chatted about today?
Um, I would say to take the time to read through Essentials of Strength and Conditioning is a great textbook. Periodization is a great book. Um, and to work out what you believe based on what you've read in training texts, what you've read in research, what you've heard from experienced coaches, and what you notice top athletes doing, and formulate a belief system, and then figure out how you're going to translate your belief system into processes and into constraints, and ultimately you will then start to form a way of working that you can tinker with because you've defined it, and that you can improve over time. So I think just defining things and taking the time to do your research can really accelerate the learning process for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great take home point because especially with the being um so much information out there now, whether it be the 30-second, Instagram clip all the way to, yeah, I think people often forget that there are actually textbooks out there that you can that you can read or even get online now. But as long as you've got your thought process, then you can see how that fits into that system as opposed to having access to all that information and trying to use it all because everything another thing I quite like to think about is everything is just a filter, and it's like, oh well, actually that's interesting but that doesn't apply to what you've got, whereas I think sometimes the challenge is trying to apply something that is doesn't fit with the system that people are wanting to create. So yeah, I think that's a great take on point for everyone listening. If anyone has any questions about what we've spoken about today, or want to reach out to you, or see the content you put out there, where can people find you, Jason?
Um, well, they could follow us at The Strength Guys, and they're welcome to email me, Jason at thestrengthguys.com as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Jason, for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed catching up with you. I thought there was some great content in there. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.